This is like nothing else we've lived through. People have compared this to 9/11, but I'll be honest, this seems a lot worse than 9/11. In 9/11, 3,000 people died, and yeah, the stock market took a big hit, but basically we got back to business very soon after that. It was shocking. People looked like and felt like zombies for weeks or months after that. But this seems just apocalyptic. We're shutting down businesses. In fact, that's probably a good segue to our next segment. We're going to talk about the economy and how the coronavirus, in particular, is affecting the economy, although not exclusively. In California, one of the businesses that was shut down as being non essential was Tesla. Now, Tesla is a huge company. I don't know their market cap off the top of my head, but their stock price was around 1,000, and then it tumbled to around $350. So it dropped by 2/3 very quickly because of the virus. Elon Musk tried to keep the factory going. He tried to keep production going. He was told he was non essential. And so we're shutting down production at the time when we can't afford to shut down production. Because, okay, luxury cars, do we need more luxury cars in a crisis? We don't, not right now. But we need respirators. We need to build some hospital beds. We've talked about that all this commercial real estate is opening up, and we need to maybe put some beds in there. Because if this crisis continues to metastasize, I checked before the show what the number of cases was. It's right now around 43,000 cases. Yesterday, it was 33,000 cases. So that's uh, what, a 30% increase in just one day. This is absolutely, we can't afford to simply stay at home. Somebody needs to produce the masks that the doctors and nurses are going to use at the hospitals. We can't afford to simply shut down our manufacturing because we cannot consume what we do not produce. And that's my first point, is that the problem is production, not consumption. A lot of people will tell you that consumption is 2/3 of the American economy, and that's an illusion. We can only consume because we produce. Are we leveraged? Absolutely. But leveraged on what? What's the collateral? People invest in the United States. They invest in our markets because they know that we produce, that we are a manufacturing powerhouse. They lend us money. Why do they lend us money? Because we produce. They wouldn't lend us money. I know the federal government is terribly in debt. American consumers have huge credit card debts. We have so much debt as a society and as a country. We probably have far too much debt. But nobody would be lending us money if they didn't have some expectation that we would be able to pay it back. And so to shut down production and think that we're going to spend our way out of this crisis is absolutely delusional. It completely misunderstands how an economy works. We must continue to produce. And maybe part of the answer is to get General Motors and Tesla Motors producing respirators. Whatever they have to do, this is in many ways like a war. But we need to keep people at work if possible, safely. Yes, I'm not saying endanger people's lives, but get those factory workers tested, make sure that they're healthy, and then put them back to work, because we can't just allow them to starve to death. We can't allow them to get behind on their mortgages. There's a lot of companies that are forgiving rent payments right now, that are forgiving mortgages, and I'm glad. I'm so happy that a lot of people are being so generous in this time. But that's not a long-term solution either. At the end of the day, somebody has to pay for these buildings. Somebody has to pay the rent. One thing that you and I also talked about was we can't afford to have another bailout of Wall Street. Politically, people will get their pitchforks. They will burn down Washington, maybe literally, if Wall Street is bailed out and Main Street is hung out to dry again. And thankfully, I think the president has heard the American people, and the bailouts that we're hearing about right now are cash payments, sort of Andrew Yang style payments, $1,000, $2,000 to citizens who are making less than $95,000 a year. Is that going to solve the
It's
problem?
essentially the UBI. Yes, it's essentially the UBI.
Yeah, it's a very short-term UBI in order to, I guess, prop up Americans who are going to be suffering here in the next few months to make sure that we
And
don't see.
I will say the Democratic Socialists are having a field day with that. They're having a
They
field day with that.
they are, and it's very strange because Nancy Pelosi is holding it up right now, and you say, why is she doing that? I mean, she wants more things in the bill.
Oh, we know
It's
exactly why she's doing
She has leverage.
that. We know why she's doing it.
It's ghoulish. I don't know if this will solve the problem. I suspect it won't. I don't think that $1,000 payments or $2,000 payments. It may stop people from grabbing pitchforks and, like I say, burning down Washington D.C. But I can't even imagine what the long term effects are. What I do know is that when UBI has been tried, it was tried in Finland. It was an absolute disaster. Now, this is a very different case. It was tried in Finland during sort of normal times. It was tried on a small scale. This is a very large scale. We're talking, what, billions, tens of billions of dollars that are going to be paid out. I don't know how many people this bailout would cover, so I can't estimate how much it's going to cost. I know that it is going to be means tested. I don't know if it's going to be everybody. We'll see exactly what happens there. I do know that right now bond rates are going up, even though we've cut interest rates to zero at the Federal Reserve. The problem is nobody wants to lend money right now because they're afraid it's not going to be paid back. And so we're trying to keep interest rates down. And for the first time in, I guess, a generation, we're seeing interest rates go up. We're seeing bond rates go up, which is good if you're a saver. It's good if you are on a fixed income, you're a senior citizen, and you don't have a safe place to put your income. One of the real tragedies over the past decade is that people who are retired don't have a safe place to put their income. They can't put their money in bonds, which used to be a safe place because the interest rate was 0.1%, something obscene like that. And nobody can afford to live unless you're very wealthy. Nobody can afford to live on 0.1% of their savings. If they were getting a reasonable return, like 2%, 3%, 5% would be historically normal. That would be doable for a lot of people, but 0.1%, you just can't do it. So they have to put their money into the stock market, and then the stock market can go up and it can go down. And we've already seen the stock market has gone from $29,000, excuse me, 29,000. The Dow Jones has gone from 29,000 down to around 18,000 today. So anybody who had their life savings in the stock market is getting wiped out. We talked about the housing market. And I said a few weeks ago that I think, in fact, I've been saying for months now that I think the housing market is going to collapse this year because it's at unsustainable levels. Unsustainable levels. In 2007, 2008, when the housing market collapsed, the stock market went down, everything went down, commodities, everything collapsed at the same time. The Case-Shiller index, which is a measurement of basically how expensive houses are, was at 200. And of course, that number goes up because as wages go up, as the economy increases, you expect housing prices to go up. But this is above and beyond. Right now, the Case-Shiller index is at 210, so it's higher than it was at the time of the collapse. And I don't see that people can afford to buy houses anymore. Even people who are doing fairly well, if you don't live out in the country, out in one of the exurbs, as they call it, how can you afford to buy a house? A lot of people have been talking about this, that millennials aren't buying homes, they're just renting perpetually. Well, right now, commercial real estate is in free fall because businesses are shutting their doors. They're not going to be paying their rent. And yeah, a lot of these places are going to go rent free for a few months and maybe they'll have some kind of forgiveness and hopefully things will come back. But a lot of these businesses simply will never bounce back. And so you're going to have a lot of empty real estate. And if commercial real estate goes out of business, That affects the entire real estate market. It's not going to be contained to the commercial sector. We're going to see the price of housing, and a lot of people who because they couldn't put their money into the stock market, or they didn't want to, uh, or maybe they did have a lot of their investments in the stock market. A huge investment for a lot of Americans is their home. And so people are going to take a bath if the housing market crashes again this year, and I absolutely believe it will, especially if unemployment. A lot of people are saying you have Goldman Sachs, J.P. Morgan are predicting 20%, 30% unemployment this year because of the coronavirus pandemic. People are going to start defaulting on their mortgages. It's not just going to be the commercial sector. So bankruptcies, delinquencies are going to pile up. And what that's going to do is suck a lot of money out of the economy, essentially. And we're going to see deflationary forces because there'll be fewer dollars in the market chasing the same number of goods, not as many services. And so, what is the Fed doing? They're pumping a lot of money into the economy. They don't want deflation. They don't want the price of houses to go down. They don't want the price of the stock market to go down. They're trying to pump up this bubble again, but this is a bubble. It's been a bubble. And what the coronavirus has been, it's been the pin that has pricked the bubble. It's not the problem itself. It's simply it's simply the match that lit the fuse. The dynamite already had to be there. So right now, cash is king. If you have cash, good for you. It's a lot better than holding on to stock. But oh boy, that's not going to last very long if they start sending out cash payments to everybody, if they keep putting money. Right now, the Federal Reserve is out buying bonds. Now, one thing that the Federal Reserve is not supposed to do is monetize the debt. They're not supposed to buy government debt because that's the same as almost literally printing money. But what they can do is they can buy treasury bonds from other people. And if people know that the Federal Reserve is buying treasury bonds, well, you buy the bonds and you flip it to the Fed. It's the same thing. So that's where we are right now. So let's just remember what happened in 2008. The stock market crashed. Gold dropped from 975 down to 740, so it went down 30%. Copper went down 75%. Silver was cut in half. Wheat was cut in half. So all commodities crashed at the same time in sympathy with the stock market because, like I said, money was sucked out of the system. And so we saw a temporary deflation. But as soon as the Fed started pumping money into the economy, and they're already doing it, we haven't seen the effects yet. It's going to take time for us to see commodities start to recover and be reinflated. But that's what's happening. They're trying to reinflate this economy. And so what happened was the price of gold went as high as almost $1,900. So it was 2.5 times its low. And we're going to see the same thing, I believe, happen. So gold is going to pick up. Housing will pick up eventually, but it will be inflation. It won't be, of course, real growth because we're not producing. That's the thing that we need to get back to. And this was something I was really hopeful about with President Trump, was that he was not just America first, but also manufacturing first. He was very worried about our manufacturing sector. And I hope he's still worried about it. And I hope he has some smart people talking to him about we need to keep the doors open of America's factories. We need to get more Americans working, producing physical, tangible things. Because the day we stop doing that is the day we stop being able to consume. A service economy is fine. It can be productive. I work in the service economy. I have for a long time. There's nothing wrong with that. That can be productive. And to some degree, we actually can export services. Now that we live in this interconnected global internet world, everything is digital. You can export digital things, but we can't afford to stop manufacturing because somebody has to build the respirators, somebody has to produce the masks, somebody has to produce the medical supplies that people need at the hospitals. We have to have physical hospitals. We can't digitize that, but that's kind of where we are right now. I'm
Well, it's
very worried.
interesting. one thing that I talked about with the, or I should say, is in the executive order from California, is this identification of critical infrastructure. And what's interesting is Governor Ducey actually today, I think actually just within an hour or so of us going on the air, he went ahead and identified critical infrastructure for Arizona. And I didn't have enough time to go through all of it, but it's interesting because the take that I got from it is that basically what the governor was doing is he's trying to say cities and counties cannot stop these things. That's what the order was, because all the order is identifying critical infrastructure, saying what it is in the state of Arizona, and basically saying these things local governments cannot stop. Period. You cannot stop these things. And so it's interesting because it's a completely different approach than what some of the other governors are doing. Because obviously, for instance, with the California situation, they cut and paste the Homeland Security guidelines. But what Governor Ducey did was he defined these different industries. Interestingly enough, one that stuck out to me was real estate.
Mm-hmm.
Real estate agents are considered critical infrastructure under Governor Ducey's executive order. But what it does is it means that the city of Phoenix, city of Tucson, city of Flagstaff, they can't go ahead and say, no, you can't do that. You can't do that. Under this,
Mm-hmm.
under our city emergency decree, you can't do real estate, for instance,
Right.
because his order supersedes them. So I thought it was interesting because it seems to me that that was a deliberate attempt to make sure that local governments don't do what you're talking about. That they don't start shutting down things that are important, that need to be open, and don't completely annihilate our economy. That was my
Right.
take from it.
Yeah. There are a lot of things like restaurants and bars. And I understand, like, if you are a waitress in a bar or a restaurant, if you own a restaurant, that these 2 weeks might absolutely crush you economically. But the fact is,
But
in
right now, any bar that has a kitchen is happy they have a kitchen. I'll tell you that.
oh, sure.
Any bar, because I'm seeing it on my because I use Uber Eats, and I'm seeing
Hmm.
these new restaurants that are actually bars using Uber Eats for the first time because they are staying open to do the delivery options.
Right.
And anybody who has a kitchen right now is thanking thanking the heavens that they made that investment,
Right.
because it's the bars that don't have kitchens. They're the ones that are completely screwed. And I also thought it
Sure.
was interesting with the situation in Arizona that the Governor Ducey specifically essentially changed the law so
Hmm.
that they can deliver alcohol. So they can
Right.
actually deliver alcohol with these deliveries, which I thought was kind of interesting because it was like, that is a big moneymaker for them.
Right.
So it's like if they're allowed to deliver alcohol, that could keep a lot of these places afloat. Theoretically, it really could.
And there was no reason not to allow that before, but this crisis has forced a lot of common sense on the people. There was no reason not to allow people to deliver alcohol before. I guess people are worried that if you have more alcohol, you'll have more violence. And as a police officer, you've seen that. People get drunk and they hit the people around them, their wife, their kids, their whoever's within arm's length,
Well, I'm
unfortunately.
very curious to see what the domestic violence rates are going to be in a lot of places, as far as with the quarantine situation, shelter in
Uh,
place, all that kind of stuff. Because
yeah.
I can only imagine they're going to skyrocket.
Well, that's exactly what I've heard. And that is something that I have, I said there was no reason not to allow before, but now that I think about it, I've heard that that domestic violence is absolutely skyrocketing in Houston right now. Everything else is down. There are fewer murders, there are fewer robberies. Nobody's doing much of anything. Nobody's leaving their homes. But child abuse is skyrocketing. Domestic violence, it's all off the charts because people are stuck at home. That's not exclusively because of alcohol, of course, but
No, that's
It's
because
really
people are
funny.
stuck at home. Because it's like the old joke. When I used to work on the holidays, you end
Hmm.
up start calling almost every holiday "Beat Your Wife Day," because people are stuck together with people that they're normally not with, and that's what happens.
Right. Pretty
You
grim.
know, it's just kind of just the way it is, unfortunately.
Hmm.
So, but I
Right.
think that there is a possible silver lining here.
Sure.
Like I said, I do think that at least in Arizona, the governor is trying to take proactive steps to ensure that things don't get quite as bad in terms of shutting everything down. And
Right.
the president has said some encouraging things too. They've talked about Haynes coming forward and saying we're going to make masks, we're going to stay open and make masks. You know what I mean? And they
Good.
specifically use as an example where they Haynes approached them and said that,
Hmm.
and it was something that they said they hadn't even really considered that Haynes could start making masks. Because it just wasn't something that occurred to them. So, obviously a little bit more out of the box thinking is necessary, but that's
Sure.
also incumbent upon the leaders in the economic community, the CEOs, to say, hey, what else can we make? You know what I mean? What
Right.
can we make that we can stay open?
Right. It may not be
Ventilators and
obvious.
masks are just two
Right.
ventilators and masks are just two examples, but there are certainly other things. You know what I mean? That they could
Sure.
do. They can shift, and then they can keep their doors open.
Right. And it may not be obvious if you're a government regulator that it's going to be the auto industry that's going to rescue the the ventilator industry. It may not be obvious that Haynes is going to make the masks. I don't know what else Haynes makes that makes it a good fit. I suppose there are probably other industries as well that could move into that space. But the fact is, now is the time to produce and to react to the situation and not sit at home, shut everything down, and wait for the crisis to get worse.
I
I
did
hope
see
that
that CVS says they're hiring 50,000 new workers,
good.
and they plan to hire a great deal of people, specifically from the hospitality industry, that have been furloughed. So
Right.
there are people that I think are looking at this and looking at ways, for lack of a better term, to get around this, because that's the way
Right.
I kind of look at it. They're looking at, because there are industries obviously that are still going to have to be open.
Sure.
Grocery stores, obviously, the list goes on and on. Like I said,
Right.
I wish I had the text in front of me from Governor Ducey's order, or you can even go to that link from the executive order from California that I was talking about. That goes to
Mhm.
the Homeland Security link, and that's what everybody is trying to emulate, is the Homeland Security recommendations of critical infrastructure. So it gives you a good
Right.
idea of the industries that are quote unquote protected.
Right. Well, we're seeing more people working from home. We're seeing a lot more delivery. And I think these were changes that had to happen anyway. It's kind of the direction that things were going. But a lot of companies simply didn't want to make the investment into figuring out how they're going to enable working telework, remote working. And it just makes so much sense that we waste how many hours, how many gallons of gas every year having people drive to jobs that there's no logical reason for them to drive to. It's so wasteful, but it's a lack of imagination that a lot of businesses have. So I guess if we're looking for silver linings, that's one of them. It's forcing businesses to be more creative. It's shaking things up. And I hope that when this crisis passes, and I'm hoping that it will pass here in the next couple weeks, that we'll have learned some important lessons and that we don't just allow the economy to go into free fall, because that's where we're headed right now. We're seeing money being just dumped into the economy. We're going to see, in my opinion, we're going to see really dangerous a dangerous bout of inflation. I think that's the going to be the big difference between the Main Street bailout and the Wall Street bailout, is that the government doesn't know how to handle a bailout like this. The money is going to go into the economy and they're not going to be able to unwind it, unlike they did unlike the way that they've managed it in the past with the banks. There's no, as far as I know, there's no playbook to handle simply handing out what trillions of dollars directly to American citizens. So
Yeah, it's true. That's very true. We'll see how that plays out.
We will. I don't have any insight, completely uncharted territory. Well, I think we've covered everything that we want to cover in today's episode. It's getting to be a little late. So, how about, are you ready to wrap up? Or is there anything else you want to add, Eric?
No, I'm good. I'm good.
Okay. Well, from Liberty Starship, this is Pete. I'm here with Eric, and you keep flying free.